The Rich Starry is a 188-meter chemical tanker owned by Shanghai Xuanren Shipping. It has been under U.S. sanctions since 2023 for transporting Iranian crude. On Monday, when the American blockade began, it turned back within minutes of approaching the Strait of Hormuz. On Tuesday, it came back and sailed straight through. The Rich Starry became the first vessel to exit the Gulf since the American blockade began, carrying 250,000 barrels of methanol loaded at the Emirati port of Hamria. China's foreign ministry called the U.S. blockade dangerous and irresponsible. It wasn't alone. At least 3 vessels, including 2 U.S. sanctioned tankers, entered the Gulf through the strait on the first full day of the blockade. Since they were not heading to Iranian ports, they were not technically affected by the blockade's terms. And there, in a single sentence, is the gap between what Trump announced and what CENTCOM is actually doing. The gap that this entire Fox News segment tried to paper over, and that the Rich Starry sailed right through.
And the U.S. naval blockade now in full effect is squeezing Iran's economy and ramping up pressure on Tehran to set aside nuclear ambitions. We're going to see how this goes. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Dana Perino.
Morning to you. That was a rockin' hour. Got another one right now. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning. Gunboat diplomacy enforcing the blockade on ships in and out of Iranian ports. Several oil tankers crossing the strait today. And now we're hearing high-level talks could resume within days, amid signs of possible progress. However, we do not know that just yet. That has not been confirmed. Now, after the first round of talks ended without a deal, the Vice President, J.D. Vance, leading those negotiations, had this update with Brett last night on Special Report.
We need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is frankly one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiations saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz.
All right, Matt Finn now brings us up today, starting a new hour. He's live from Dubai, Persian Gulf. And Matt, hello again to you.
Good morning, Bill. Day 2 of the American blockade. And so far, no reports of any major incidents or confrontations out on the Persian Gulf behind me. Fox's Lauren Simonetti reports that a Chinese-owned ship carrying oil and chemicals passed much earlier today after first trying yesterday. And Kepler reports 3 other oil tankers reportedly crossed today. One had a Panama flag, one had a Guyana flag, and one had a Cook's Island flag. Now, this tracks with what the president and CENTCOM have been saying, that the entire Persian Gulf is not blocked. Rather, the U.S. is preventing ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports. Now, an Iranian military spokesperson has been warning of retaliation, writing, if the security of Iranian ports is threatened, no port in the Gulf or the Sea of Oman will be safe. Now, the latest report from the International Energy Agency says continued attacks on the energy infrastructure here in the Middle East and ongoing restrictions to tanker movements throughout the Strait of Hormuz has led to the largest fuel disruption in history. Now, initially, the deepest cuts in oil came from the Middle East, heavily impacting jet fuel. But if things remain as is here in the Middle East, scarcity and higher prices in places like the United States are expected to persist. Dana, Bill.
Got it, Matt. Thanks. Matt Finn, live in Dubai. Thank you, Dana.
We have more on this with Brent Sadler. He's a retired Navy captain and senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Take us there in your mind. As I just give you this a little bit from Mark Thiessen in his Washington Post column today, says Trump flips the script in the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire gave the president an opening. He's used it to turn Iran's strategy back on itself. So if you were to place yourself there in your imagination, what do you think that those captains are waiting for? I mean, it's possible, as we showed, there could be ships that are stopped and boarded, and then what happens?
Yeah, great to be back on your show. It's a great question. I think it's safe to assume that several steps in this chess game has been thought out, and the pieces have already been put in place. I mean, the ceasefire, as tenuous as it is, has allowed for a rearming, a rest, and a recoup, and also a refocus of those naval and air operations to basically enforce this new blockade. And most importantly, you saw literally as the negotiations were breaking down over the weekend, naval vessels opening up a mine-clear route, a so-called Q route, so that shipping can transit with confidence. And that's the confidence that's important to drive down the insurance rates. Again, the 8 underwriters or so that are that own that business in London, hopefully they'll start to drop the rates. And what is now turning into a stream of ships can turn back into a flood and revive the global energy market. But in the meantime, 10 to 17% increase in business in the Gulf of America.
We've talked about this strait being only 20 miles across, but if you stood on the beach and looked at the horizon, you can probably see 3 or 5 miles, right, before it ends. We're talking 20 miles at a minimum. That's a big body of water. And the Iranians are claiming that they've mined it. There's no evidence that proves that, sir. What do you think of that? My point is, if you prove it's not mined, you have the ability to transit that route.
Again, it comes back to confidence, and just the more ships pass through there, then basically the truth will be told to the lie that there's so many mines and so much military threat from the Iranians that it's not worth going through. And you're starting to see that confidence come up. As far as the Iranians mining the Straits of Hormuz, they on their own admission said that they did about a dozen or so mines in international waters. Again, this is against international law, violates the Geneva and Hague Conventions, so war crime that they just admitted to. But again, sending the mine clearance and clearing out a route is what has apparently been done, not the entirety of the Strait of Hormuz, but at least that route. And that's at a minimum all that's needed to get the ships through.
Okay, let's talk to you a little bit more about going forward. I guess there could be possible talks, but in the meantime, Vice President Vance spoke about what they learned from the Iranians over the weekend.
I do think that we acquired some knowledge about how the Iranians are negotiating, and this is ultimately why we left Pakistan, because what we figured out is that they were unable, I think the team that was there was unable to cut a deal, and they had to go back to Tehran. I really think the ball is in the Iranian court because we put a lot on the table.
And so now, is it return serve?
No, I think the Iranians were trying to do a repeat of like 2015 and previous negotiations, thinking that for domestic political reasons, the United States needed this deal more than they did. And I think, again, this regime in Tehran has very sorely misjudged the Trump administration. If it's any party that needs this deal, it's the Iranians, and they are in an extremely weak position on the negotiations. So it's not as surprising that they would do this or attempt it. And again, now trying to quickly come back to the negotiation, perhaps in Pakistan, and we'll see. But the clear thing is the pressure needs to be sustained. At the same time, the U.S. is not the side that has to acquiesce or make any concessions. It is the Iranians that, quite frankly, have to do that.
Brent Sadler, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you.
Another day, as we say. Thanks. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
Here is what Trump said. Effective immediately, the United States Navy will begin the process of blockading any and all ships trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz. Here is what CENTCOM actually implemented. The blockade targets vessels linked to Iranian ports only while allowing unhindered transit to and from non-Iranian destinations. These are not the same thing. One is a total closure. The other is a targeted sanctions enforcement operation with a military upgrade. The distinction matters enormously because Iran's leverage in the strait was never just about its own oil exports. It was about controlling who passes through at all. A sanctioned Chinese tanker loaded with methanol from a UAE port just demonstrated that the blockade has a hole large enough to sail a 188-meter ship through. If it didn't call at an Iranian port, CENTCOM won't stop it, even if the ship itself, its owner, and its cargo history are all tied to Iranian sanctions evasion. The Fox segment's guest, retired Navy Captain Brent Sadler, understood this. He focused not on the blockade's enforcement, but on the real bottleneck: confidence, insurance rates, mine clearance, the willingness of commercial ships to trust that the route is safe. Just more ships pass through there, he said. Then basically the truth will be told to the lie. That's the honest assessment. The blockade isn't going to physically seal the strait. What it might do, if the mine clearing holds and the insurance underwriters in London respond, is gradually restore commercial confidence in the waterway while choking off Iran's specific revenue streams. The Fox segment played Vance's interview with Brett Baier from the night before, and it contained the most revealing post-negotiation analysis the vice president has given. What we figured out is that they were unable, the team that was there, was unable to cut a deal. They had to go back to Tehran. Read that carefully. Vance isn't saying Iran refused. He's saying the Iranian delegation in the room, Ghalibaf and Araghchi, didn't have the authority to make a deal. They needed to consult someone back home. An official said Vance probed Iran's vulnerabilities over the 21 hours, and now Trump will test them. This tracks with what every analyst has been saying for weeks. Nobody knows who actually runs Iran. The Supreme Leader's son, Mojtaba Khamenei, is theoretically in charge but hasn't been verified alive in public. Ghalibaf is the most visible surviving leader, but may not have nuclear decision-making authority. The IRGC operates semi-independently. The civilian government has limited power. Vance went to Islamabad to make a deal and discovered there may not be anyone on the other side empowered to make one. During the 40-day war, Iran earned about $9 billion from crude exports. The blockade is expected to cost Iran approximately $150 million daily in lost revenue. That number is the blockade's real weapon, not the warships, not the mine clearing, but the financial strangulation of a regime that was already bleeding from 6 weeks of bombing. If Iran can't export oil, it can't pay its remaining military. It can't fund Hezbollah. It can't rebuild. It can't feed its population. But, and this is the part the Fox segment didn't explore, the blockade also prevents Iranian oil from reaching global markets. Iran's crude sales of roughly 2 million barrels per day were one of the few things keeping oil prices from going even higher. Removing that supply pushes prices up further. The International Monetary Fund said the global economy is facing a major test from the war. It projects global growth slowing to 3.1% in 2026. The IEA said global oil demand is expected to fall by 80,000 barrels per day as demand destruction spreads. The International Rescue Committee is calling for the urgent establishment of a humanitarian corridor through the strait to allow delivery of life-saving aid to vulnerable populations in Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia. The blockade doesn't just hurt Iran, it hurts everyone downstream of the strait, which is, functionally, everyone on Earth who eats food, buys fuel, or uses products that move by ship. Retired Navy Captain Brent Sadler offered 2 observations that cut through the noise. First, on the mine threat. On their own admission, they said they did a dozen or so mines in international waters against international law, violates the Geneva and Hague Conventions, war crimes they just admitted to. The Fox segment didn't dwell on this, but it's significant. Iran has publicly confessed to laying mines in international waters, which is a war crime under international humanitarian law. This admission could have legal consequences if the conflict ever reaches an international tribunal. Second, on the real dynamic. The Iranians were trying to do a repeat of 2015, thinking that for domestic political reasons, the United States needed this deal more than they did. This regime in Tehran has misjudged the Trump administration. This is the core strategic bet both sides are making. Iran thinks domestic pressure, gas prices, midterm elections, public war weariness will force Trump to make concessions. Trump thinks military and economic pressure will force Iran to capitulate. Both are betting the other side breaks first. Sadler's assessment of who's right. If any party needs this deal, it is the Iranians. Maybe. But Ghalibaf's gas station photograph, enjoy the current pump figures, suggests Tehran thinks it can outlast American consumer patience. And with the IMF warning of a global economic slowdown and the IEA documenting the largest fuel disruption in history, the cost of being wrong falls on everyone, not just the 2 parties at the table. Near the top of the segment, Perino cut to the heart of it. If you were to place yourself in your imagination, what do you think they are waiting for? What is Iran waiting for? Sadler's answer was tactical. They're waiting for their straight leverage to produce results. But the deeper answer is one nobody on television seems willing to articulate. Iran may be waiting for the world to force America to stop, not through military action, through economic pain, through food crises, through oil at $120, $140, $160, through European and Asian governments telling Washington that the cost of this blockade is higher than whatever nuclear concession Iran is refusing to make, through the IMF and the FAO and the shipping industry and the insurance underwriters in London all saying the same thing. This cannot continue. That's Iran's real strategy. Not military resistance. They've lost that war. Economic endurance. Outlast the blockade. Let the world's pain become America's political problem. And wait for the phone to ring. The IMF said the global economy faces a major test. The IEA said oil demand is falling as scarcity and higher prices persist, and that oil prices posted their largest ever monthly gain in March. The International Rescue Committee called for a humanitarian corridor through the strait for aid deliveries to Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia. The last pre-war oil tankers have delivered their final cargoes. The world has now exhausted its supply of pre-war crude. 250 million barrels of reserves have been drawn down since the war began. In-person talks between the U.S. and Iran could resume as early as this week. None of this appeared in the Fox segment. Instead, the discussion centered on the blockade's military mechanics, Iran's desperation, and the administration's leverage. All real topics. But covering a naval blockade without mentioning its impact on global food, fuel, and financial stability is like covering a hurricane and only talking about the wind speed. The Rich Starry is somewhere in the Gulf of Oman, having proven that a sanctioned Chinese tanker can navigate both Iranian mines and American blockade rules with a UAE cargo manifest and a willingness to simply try. The blockade is on. The mines are being cleared. The talks may resume. Oil is above $100. Gas is climbing. The IMF is warning. The FAO is warning. The IRC is warning. And a retired Navy captain on Fox News just told America the truth in the plainest possible terms. The pressure needs to be sustained. At the same time, the U.S. is not the side that has to make any concessions. Whether that confidence holds when American families are paying $5 for gas and $6 for diesel, and the fertilizer shortage starts showing up in food prices, that's the test the blockade will face. Not from Iranian fast boats, from American grocery stores. Day 46, the Rich Starry sailed through, and the world keeps waiting.